Search teams found Sarah Langley after 72 hours in the Blackridge Woods. Her rescue footage went viral until someone noticed what was so wrong with her smile. That's when the FBI sealed the tapes. But I've got the uncut version, and what happens at the 47-minute mark will make you question every missing persons case you've ever heard. Sarah, 28, a marathon runner, knew Blackridge Woods like the back of her hand. It was her sanctuary, until that crisp autumn morning. Her last text to her husband, Mark, at 9:17 a.m. read, "Trail marker 14 looks wrong. Going to check." Then, nothing, just those 12 words. Hanging in the digital ether, Mark's immediate calls went unanswered. By 3:00 p.m., a cold dread set in, and he alerted the Blackridge County Sheriff's Department. The initial search was swift but futile. Local volunteers and deputies combed the well-trodden paths around trail marker 14, their calls echoing eerily through the trees. As night fell, a light drizzle began, turning the forest floor into a slick, muddy labyrinth. Thermal drones hummed overhead, their mechanical drone a stark contrast to the hoot of unseen owls. Highly trained 9 units were brought in, but the dogs seemed confused, agitated. They'd pick up a scent, follow it for a short distance, then stop abruptly, whimpering, their tails tucked. One German shepherd, usually fearless, refused to enter a thicket near a cluster of ancient gnarled oaks, its hackles raised, a low growl rumbling in its chest. The hours bled into each other. Tuesday night became Wednesday morning, the drizzle a steady rain. The initial hope that Sarah had merely twisted an ankle or taken a wrong turn began to evaporate, replaced by a grim resignation. The local news picked up the story, a familiar headline: "Experienced hiker missing in Blackridge Woods." Her smiling photo, taken on a brighter day, flashed across screens, a stark contrast to the growing despair. Emergency services established a command center at the trailhead, a cluster of tents and flashing lights against the encroaching darkness. Maps were spread out, marked with grids and search patterns. Mark sat there, numb, clutching his phone, rereading Sarah's last text over and over again. Trail marker 14 looks wrong. What could make a trail marker look wrong? Was it merely misplaced? Or was it something else? Something that had caught her attention, drawing her deeper into the shadows. 3 days, 72 agonizing hours passed. The family's hope dwindled to a fragile ember. The public, initially sympathetic, began to whisper. Had she run away? Was it an accident? The woods, in their vast, indifferent silence, offered no answers. The media, ever hungry, started to speculate, weaving narratives around the missing hiker, each one more heartbreaking than the last. But Mark knew. Deep in his gut, he knew something truly inexplicable had happened. Something far worse than a simple hiking accident. Her last text, that chilling echo of 14 on the static of his replayed calls. It haunted him. It felt like a key, a clue to a lock he couldn't quite grasp. The woods were not just silent anymore. They felt watchful, and something about that feeling was infinitely more terrifying than the thought of her simply being lost. The drone operator, a young man named Alex, had been staring at the thermal imaging screen for 18 hours straight, eyes burning from the green monochrome display. The Blackridge Woods sprawled beneath them, an endless, featureless expanse of heat signatures, deer, rabbits, the occasional bear, searchers. Then, at 3:17 a.m. on Thursday, a flicker, a human-shaped signature unusually still, near Dead Oak Creek. Alex zoomed in, a jolt of adrenaline cutting through his exhaustion. It was undeniably human. No obvious injuries, no movement, just standing there. An anomaly in the chilling pre-dawn hours. Target spotted, North Ridge Grid, Sector 7, near Dead Oak Creek. Alex's voice crackled over the emergency radio, cutting through the weary chatter. Ground teams, previously trudging through the rain-soaked undergrowth, mobilized with renewed urgency. Sheriff Miller, a man whose face was etched with 3 days of worry, barked orders into his comms. All units converge. Approach with caution. The first responder on scene was Medic Jenkins, a seasoned paramedic with 20 years of experience in wilderness rescues. He navigated the dense thicket, his flashlight beam cutting through the fog until he saw her. Sarah Langley. Just as the drone had shown, she was standing perfectly still, facing away from him, her silhouette stark against the faint glow of the rising sun filtered through the canopy. Her clothes were mud-caked, her hair matted with leaves, but she showed no signs of hypothermia, no visible scrapes or bruises. It was almost too perfect. Jenkins approached slowly, calling out her name, his voice a cautious murmur. "Sarah? Sarah? Can you hear me? We're here to help." He moved to her side, expecting a reaction, a tearful embrace, relief. What he got instead sent a shiver down his spine that had nothing to do with the cold. As he reached her, Sarah turned her head. Mad. Not her body, just her head. It swiveled on her neck first, in an unnaturally smooth, almost mechanical motion, like a doll's. Her body, her shoulders and torso followed a full second later, as if unattached, lagging behind. The movement was so disjointed, so fundamentally wrong, that Jenkins instinctively recoiled. He'd seen people in shock, people with spinal injuries. This was neither. Her eyes, when they finally met his, were wide, unblinking, and utterly devoid of emotion. No fear, no relief, no recognition, just a vacant stare that seemed to look through him, not at him. Her lips were slightly parted, almost in a smile, but it was a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a rictus that felt more like a mask than an expression. Jenkins forced himself to push past the immediate unease. "Sarah, are you hurt? Can you tell me what happened?" He reached out, cautiously, to check her pulse. As his fingers brushed her wrist, he felt her skin. It was cold. Not hypothermic cold, but a deep, inert chill, like cold marble. And beneath it, a strange, almost imperceptible tremor, like something was vibrating deep within her. He pulled his hand back, a prickle of alarm crawling up his arm. Sheriff Miller arrived moments later, his relief quickly turning to bewilderment as he observed Sarah. "Is she all right?" he asked Jenkins, his voice low. Jenkins shook his head, his gaze fixed on Sarah's unnervingly still form. "I don't know, Sheriff. She's unresponsive, but her vitals are stable. Too stable." The word wrong echoed in his mind, just as it had in Sarah's last text. Everything about her presence felt wrong. The lack of relief, the unnatural stillness, that delayed head turn. It was all profoundly, terrifyingly wrong. The woods, which had swallowed her for 72 hours, had returned something that looked like Sarah, but was distinctly not. The rescue, meant to be a moment of triumph, had become a chilling mystery. The silence around them, broken only by the distant whir of the drone and the rustling leaves, seemed to hold its breath, waiting for whatever came next. The ER room hummed with a sterile unease. Sarah lay on the gurney, seemingly normal, yet nurses steered clear, whispering about her 1,000-yard stare. Dr. Eris Thorne, a seasoned neurologist known for his calm demeanor, began the standard intake interview, his tape recorder hissing softly on the bedside table. He started with the basics: name, date of birth, how she felt. Sarah's responses were flat, monotone, yet technically correct. "Sarah," Dr. Thorne began, his voice gentle, "can you tell me what happened out in the woods?" her eyes, still wide and unblinking, fixed on a point just beyond his shoulder. Her voice, when it came, was a soft, guttural whisper, devoid of inflection. "I found the real trail marker." 14. Thorne paused, his pen hovering over his notepad. "The real trail marker 14? What do you mean by that, Sarah?" He leaned in slightly, trying to catch her gaze, to find some flicker of the woman her husband described. "The one. Hidden," she continued, her voice gaining a faint, unsettling resonance, as if she were speaking from a great distance. "The one they don't want you to find." Her pupils, already unnaturally large, began to dilate further. Slowly, steadily, they expanded, swallowing the iris until her eyes were completely, utterly black. No sclera, no color, just twin voids that seemed to absorb the light in the room. Thorne felt a prickle of alarm. This wasn't a normal neurological response. He cleared his throat, maintaining his professional composure. "Sarah, what did you see at this real trail marker?" A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through her body. Her lips stretched into that uncanny, mask-like smile he'd noticed earlier, wider than a human mouth should comfortably allow, pulling taut against her gums. And then she began to whisper again, words that made no sense, yet vibrated with a chilling intent. "The roots, they sing. The trees, they breathe." Then, without warning, her jaw unhinged with a sickening wet squelch. It didn't dislocate in a way that looked painful. It looked deliberate, as if the hinge itself had simply dissolved. Her lower jaw dropped, creating a cavernous black opening that seemed far too deep for a human throat. A low, wet, gurgling sound emanated from her, like water moving through a constricted pipe. "Doctor." Thorne instinctively recoiled, his chair scraping back across the linoleum floor. He reached for the emergency call button, his mind racing. This wasn't shock. This wasn't trauma. This was something else entirely. Before his finger could connect, Sarah let out a scream. It was a sound that defied description. Not human, not animal. It was a pure, unfiltered shriek of primal terror and boundless rage, amplified to an impossible volume, vibrating through the very bones of the room. It assaulted the ears, burrowed into the skull. The fluorescent lights flickered violently, and a crack snaked across the ceiling tile above her gurney. The medical instruments on the nearby tray rattled violently, and then, as suddenly as it began, the scream cut off abruptly. Sarah's jaw snapped back into place with another wet, audible pop, as if it had never dislocated. Her eyes, still coal black, stared ahead. The room fell into an unnerving silence, broken only by the frantic beeping of the heart monitor, which had spiked erratically during her scream, and was now slowly, unnaturally, normalizing. Dr. Thorne, heart pounding, stared at her. He saw no lingering sign of the bizarre episode. Her face was placid, the fake smile still fixed, but he knew what he had witnessed. He knew what he had heard. He snatched the tape recorder from the table, his hand trembling, and pressed the stop button. The machine clicked off, preserving the chilling evidence. He stared at Sarah, a cold dread seeping into him. The woman on the gurney looked like Sarah Langley, but the entity that had just occupied her body, the one that had screamed, that was something else entirely, and it had found its way back from the woods. The FBI didn't seize the tapes because of what happened inside the ER. They sealed them because of what happened outside. Sheriff Miller's dashcam footage, standard issue for all patrol vehicles, was a grainy, low-res capture of the chaotic rescue scene. It showed Sarah being carefully helped into the ambulance, her still figure a stark contrast to the urgency of the medics. But in the age of viral content, someone got their hands on an unedited copy, and that's when the real horror began. The video, initially praised as a testament to search and rescue efforts, quickly became infamous. A sharp-eyed user, pausing the footage at the 47-minute mark, highlighted a specific frame. It was a fleeting moment, as Sarah was half lifted, half guided into the ambulance, her face still obscured by the paramedic's shoulder. The camera, however, caught the reflection in the ambulance's rear window. And in that reflection, something was still standing in the trees, just beyond the edge of the clearing. At first glance, it looked like Sarah. The same height, the same distinctive auburn hair, even the general shape of her body. But upon enhancement, magnifying those few pixels, the horrifying truth emerged. This reflection wasn't Sarah. It was a distorted mimicry. The figure in the reflection was stretched thinner, impossibly attenuated, as if viewed through a funhouse mirror that only stretched vertically. Its limbs seemed elongated, its posture too rigid, too perfect, like a photograph held taut. The hair, while similar in color, hung in unnaturally straight, heavy curtains, and the most disturbing detail, its face, dimly visible in the low-light reflection, appeared smooth, featureless almost, with the faintest hint of something that could be a smile. But it was too wide, too flat, like a mask pressed against a pane of glass. It wasn't a face, so much as a suggestion of one. The chilling implication struck everyone who saw it. If Sarah was being put into the ambulance, what was that thing still standing in the woods, watching? Was it a trick of light? A shadow? The FBI dismissed it as an anomaly, a lens flare, a distortion inherent in low-quality footage. But the online community, fueled by morbid fascination, refused to let it go. Enhanced versions, sharpened and color-corrected, began to circulate, making the impossible features of the reflected entity sickeningly clear. Then came the audio analysis, a separate, deeper dive into the raw dashcam sound. Beneath the shouts of the medics, the static of the radio, and the whir of the ambulance engine, a faint, almost subliminal sound was isolated. It was a faint, high-pitched fingernails on glass, a scraping, dragging sound, as if something incredibly long and sharp was being drawn slowly down a pane of glass. It was barely audible, yet undeniably present in the exact moments the reflected figure was visible. And then, overlaid with that unsettling scrape, a soft, ethereal sound. The distinct giggle of a child, light, innocent, but utterly out of place in the pre-dawn wilderness, and chillingly devoid of any genuine mirth. It was a sound that made the hair on your arms stand on end, a sound that implied something ancient and predatory was playing a game. The FBI's official statement labeled the reflections and audio as digital artifacts and environmental noise. But the internet knew better. The whispers began. Sarah hadn't been rescued. She had been replaced, and whatever had returned in her place, it had left something of itself behind. A silent sentinel in the shadowy depths of the Black Ridge woods, watching its new acquisition drive away. The knowledge that this thing, whatever it was, could stand so close, so perfectly mimicking a human outline, unseen by the searchers, and then leave such a faint, horrifying calling card. That was the real trigger for the lockdown. That was why the tapes disappeared. Because if something could stand there, in plain sight, reflected, and then simply vanish, what else could it do? The homecoming should have been joyous. A small gathering of close family and friends, relief washing over them like a warm tide. But even amidst the forced smiles and hushed congratulations, an undeniable chill lingered. Sarah was home, but she wasn't home. She moved with a stiff, almost puppet-like grace, her responses to questions polite but hollow. Mark, her husband, tried to ignore the growing unease, attributing it to trauma and exhaustion. He just wanted his wife back, wholly. That first night, silence settled over their house, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the distant hum of the refrigerator and the gentle creaking of old floorboards. Mark lay awake beside Sarah, listening to her breathing. It was shallow, almost imperceptible. He reached out hesitantly to touch her hand. Her skin was still that unnaturally cool marble, the same inert chill Medic Jenkins had noted. He pulled his hand back, a knot tightening in his stomach. Then, at precisely 3:17 a.m., the digital clock on their bedside table glowed that exact time, the same eerie timestamp from her rescue. Mark stirred, his eyes snapping open. Sarah wasn't beside him. He sat up, heart pounding. The room was dark, save for the faint green glow of the clock. A rustling sound came from the foot of their bed. He squinted into the gloom, his breath catching in his throat. There she was, kneeling. She was on her hands and knees at the side of their bed, facing away from him, her head bowed. Her posture was unsettlingly rigid, like a predator patiently stalking prey. "Sarah?" Mark whispered, his voice a dry rasp. Slowly, she turned her head. Again, that unnatural swivel, the body following a beat later. Her eyes, even in the dim light, seemed darker, deeper than before. "You need to see where I slept," she whispered. Her voice was raspy, dry, almost like gravel. And then, a smell hit him. A damp, earthy odor, like freshly turned soil, but deeper, richer, with an undercurrent of something acrid, almost like decay. Her breath. It smelled like wet soil, not just damp earth, but the deep, mineral scent of ancient, undisturbed ground. Mark's blood ran cold. "You?" He fumbled for the lamp switch on his nightstand, his fingers clumsy with rising panic. He had to see. He had to know. The light clicked on, flooding the room with a harsh, revealing glare. Mark flinched, his eyes darting to Sarah. Her pajamas, they were caked in leaves. Not just a few stray leaves from walking in the woods. These were pressed deep into the fabric, clinging to every fiber, dark and brittle. They were the distinctive shape and color of oak and maple leaves. But the rich, vibrant reds and golds of autumn were gone. These were faded, desiccated, almost black, crumbling to dust at the slightest touch. And they were from last year's fall season. The specific decay pattern, the skeletal veins visible in some, undeniably belonged to foliage that had fallen months ago, weathered through winter and spring. Mark had raked those leaves himself last November. Sarah knelt there, illuminated by the lamp, seemingly oblivious to the horror. The faint buzz of an insect swarm seemed to emanate from her, a low, barely audible thrumming that vibrated in the air around her, like tiny, unseen wings. He saw a small dark beetle, frantic and disoriented, crawl out from beneath her sleeve, skitter across the pristine white bedsheet, and then fall, motionless, to the floor. Mark stared at her, the reality of the situation slamming into him with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't his Sarah. This wasn't trauma. This was something that had crawled out of the earth, something that carried the very essence of the forest floor, of rot and decay within it. And it was kneeling at his bedside, its breath smelling of the grave, covered in the remnants of a past season, as if time itself had warped around it. The chilling implication was undeniable. Whatever she had truly encountered at the real trail marker 14 had fundamentally altered her, blurring the line between life and something ancient and unspeakable. The family dog, Buster, a shaggy golden retriever mix usually overflowing with boundless affection, became the next alarm. Since Sarah's return, he'd been off. He'd whimper and hide when she entered a room, his tail tucked tight between his legs. But then he started howling, not a playful bark, not a mournful cry, but a guttural, terrified howl directed specifically at Sarah's shadow. It happened late one afternoon. Sarah was standing near the living room window, her back to the setting sun, casting a long, distorted shadow across the floor. Buster, who had been dozing by the fireplace, suddenly erupted, He barked, a desperate, frantic sound, then backed away, low to the ground, his hackles rising, a terrifying, unbroken howl tearing from his throat. He wasn't looking at Sarah. He was looking at her shadow. Mark, startled, tried to calm him. "Buster, what is it, boy?" But Buster ignored him, eyes wide with primal fear, fixed on the elongation of Sarah's form on the carpet. Mark looked at the shadow himself. It seemed sharper, somehow more angular. And then he saw it. A fleeting, almost imperceptible detail in the exaggerated darkness. The shadow's fingers seemed to splay unnaturally, too many points, too sharp. That's when the memory of the viral dashcam footage and the stretched thinner reflection clicked in Mark's mind. He felt a cold dread. He remembered the old wives' tale about dogs seeing things humans couldn't. Driven by a desperate, sickening curiosity, Mark went through old vacation photos. He started with images from before Sarah's disappearance. Cheerful snapshots of beach trips and mountain hikes. Normal, perfect. Then he moved to the pictures taken since her return. Family selfies, candid shots around the house, all part of the attempt to normalize her presence, to convince himself she was truly back. He held up a recent Polaroid, one taken just yesterday in their garden. Sarah was smiling, or rather, wearing that unsettling, fixed rictus that now passed for her smile. He looked at her image in the photograph, then he looked at the reflection in the window beside him. In the glass, Sarah's reflection showed something subtly, horrifyingly different. Her hand, resting casually on her hip in the photo, was distorted in the reflection. Her fingers seemed too long, too spindly. And yes, there were distinct, unnatural bulges along their length. Extra joints in her fingers, not just elongated, but visibly segmented beyond normal human anatomy, like an insect's leg. It was faint. A trick of the light he desperately wanted to believe, but undeniable once seen. And then, his gaze shifted slightly above her shoulder in the reflection. In the very top corner of the window, just peeking into view, was a dark, amorphous shape. It was indistinct, blurred, almost like a smudge on the glass. But as he squinted, his mind struggling to process, he could almost make out something like an eye, or a cluster of eyes, and a faint, almost transparent outline, like a shimmering distortion in the air itself, that seemed to connect to the top of Sarah's head. Something was peeking over her shoulder, in her reflection, something that wasn't there in the actual room, wasn't there in the photograph. A gasp caught in Mark's throat. He dropped the Polaroid, his hand trembling. The photograph itself seemed innocent, but the reflection was a window into a truth too horrific to comprehend. It showed Sarah, but also something else, a symbiotic parasite, a hidden horror clinging to her, manifesting only in warped reality. Just then, from Sarah's own hand, which had been resting on the arm of the sofa, came a series of soft, rapid clicks, like knuckles cracking, but it wasn't a natural sound. It was distinct, deliberate, and chillingly, it sounded like knuckles cracking. In reverse order, starting from her fingertips and moving backwards towards her palm. A soft, dry snap, 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 an impossibly quick, unsettling sequence that sent a fresh wave of nausea through Mark. The sound felt like the tightening of invisible wires, like a body being recalibrated. He knew, with absolute certainty, that whatever had returned from Black Ridge Woods had brought with it a physical alteration, a horrifying mutation, and a silent, watchful companion that only the camera and the instincts of a terrified dog could reveal. His wife was gone, replaced by a reflection of a nightmare. Mrs. Pearson, the Langeles' elderly neighbor, was a creature of habit. Every dawn, without fail, she'd be out tending her expansive cornfield, a sprawling green ocean bordering the Black Ridge Woods. She'd been a quiet, observant presence in the community for decades, her word as good as gold. So when her distressed call came into 911 at 6:00 a.m. sharp, the dispatcher, used to her calm, concise reports, knew something was profoundly wrong. "She wasn't breathing, ma'am," Mrs. Pearson rasped into the phone, her voice thick with fear and disbelief. "I swear to God, she wasn't breathing, but she was standing right there. In my cornfield." The dispatcher, typing rapidly, asked for clarification. "Who wasn't breathing, Mrs. Pearson? Can you tell me what happened?" Sarah Langley, the old woman affirmed, her voice trembling. "I was out for my morning walk, checking the new growth, and there she was, just standing deep in the stalks, like she'd been there all night." Mrs. Pearson paused, a shuddering breath rattling in her chest. The sun was barely up, painting everything orange, and her skin, it looked gray in that light, like ash, and there was no mist from her breath, you see. No vapor, not a single cloud, even though it was bitter cold this morning. She wasn't breathing. The dispatcher, growing increasingly concerned, noted the erratic nature of the call. "And the corn, Mrs. Pearson? You mentioned something about the corn." "Oh, the corn." Mrs. Pearson's voice rose in pitch, bordering on a wail. "That's the worst of it. The stalks around her were vibrating, like something was alive inside them. A low hum, a buzz. Not wind, not animals. It was like the corn was singing to her, or she was singing to the corn." She trailed off, a broken sob escaping her lips. "I backed away slowly. Ma'am, I didn't want it to see me." The 911 call recording ended there, but deputies were dispatched immediately. Mrs. Pearson, found huddled on her porch swing, shivering despite a thick blanket, recounted the same terrifying story. She pointed them to the exact spot in the cornfield. There was nothing there, no footprints, no flattened stalks, no sign anyone had been there at all. The corn stood perfectly still, swaying gently in the morning breeze. However, Mrs. Pearson also had a rudimentary security camera, a cheap, motion-activated device perched precariously on a fence post overlooking her field. It was an old model, recording to a constantly looping VHS tape, its output fed to an ancient CRT TV in her living room. The deputies, skeptical but thorough, asked to review the footage. They fast-forwarded through hours of grainy, static-laced video, deer, rabbits, the wind rustling the stalks. Then, the screen filled with the Pradon orange, and there she was, a figure, undeniably Sarah, standing unnervingly still amidst the corn. The camera's low resolution blurred her features, but her posture was unmistakable. The deputies leaned in, a collective gasp escaping them as they saw what Mrs. Pearson described: the absolute stillness of her form, the lack of any visible breath in the cold air, and then the corn. Around her, the stalks did indeed seem to shimmer, a subtle internal vibration that caused the leaves to blur on the recording, a low-frequency distortion only visible in the affected area. It wasn't violent, not like a storm. It was a rhythmic, almost pulsing tremor, as if the very ground beneath her was humming. Suddenly, without warning, the old CRTV imploded. Not just went dark, but shattered inward with a sickening pop and a shower of sparks, emitting a high-pitched whine that cut off abruptly. The deputies jumped back, adrenaline surging. The screen cracked, a spiderweb of black lines radiating from the center. The image of Sarah in the cornfield gone. Among the shattered glass and smoking electronics, one deputy noticed something else. Whoa. Embedded in the debris, where the screen had once been, was a small, green object. He cautiously picked it up. It was a single, perfectly formed ear of corn, but it was raw, glistening, and embedded in its kernels was a wet, sickening crunch, like something had been chewing on it, leaving behind a pulpy, half-digested mass that smelled faintly of sweet decay. It was a fresh ear, snapped directly from the stalk. There was no corn like that in the field, not yet. Not this early in the season. The deputies exchanged horrified glances. Mrs. Pearson's testimony, once dismissed as an old woman's fearful imaginings, now felt chillingly real. The static, the implosion, the impossible ear of corn. Sarah wasn't just in the cornfield. She was part of it, interacting with it in a way that defied natural laws, leaving behind a single, terrifying proof that confirmed the old woman's unbelievable claim. Whatever was inhabiting Sarah Langley had a connection to the very earth itself, and it was still feeding. Sarah's infant daughter, Lily, had always been a peaceful sleeper, but since her mother's return, the nights had become a torment. Lily would wake screaming, not the usual cries of a hungry or uncomfortable baby, but a guttural, terrified shriek that pierced the silence of the house. Mark, desperate for sleep and answers, had installed a baby monitor with a night vision camera in Lily's nursery. He hoped it would catch why his daughter was so distressed. It caught more than he bargained for. The footage from Tuesday night, just 2 days after Sarah's return, became Exhibit A in the growing dossier of horrors. The nanny cam, positioned subtly on a shelf, captured the entire crib. At first, it was just Lily, stirring fitfully in her sleep. Mark watched from his phone, heart aching for his child. Then the nursery door creaked open. Sarah entered. She moved with that familiar, unnerving stillness, her silhouette gliding silently across the room. She approached the crib, and Lily's whimpering immediately escalated into frantic wails. Mark gripped his phone, his knuckles white. Sarah stood over the crib, looking down at her terrified daughter. Mark could see her lips moving, though the audio was muffled. Her hand slowly reached into the crib, not to comfort, but to gently touch Lily's head. The baby recoiled, screaming louder, her tiny hands flailing. Mark watched, frozen, as Sarah's lips stretched into that chilling, unblinking smile. And then she began to whisper, "Shh. The trees are singing now." Mark's blood ran cold. The sound of her voice, caught by the sensitive microphone of the baby monitor, was low, almost a lullaby, but laced with an undeniable resonant quality that sent shivers down his spine. He heard rustling sounds, like dry leaves, emanating from her, as if the forest itself was embedded within her. The baby monitor's built-in static seemed to intensify, a low, buzzing white noise crackling in the background, almost as if it was struggling to process the unnatural audio. Desperate for a clearer understanding, Mark sent the raw audio file to a friend, a sound engineer who specialized in forensic audio analysis. He just wanted the background noise filtered out, Sarah's whispers isolated. What his friend returned was far more terrifying than anything he could have imagined. "Dude, you need to hear this," his friend had texted, the urgency clear even in text. "I cleaned up the track, her voice, it's layered, and the background, it's not static." Mark plugged in his headphones and pressed play. He heard Sarah's voice, clearer now, whispering, "Shh. The trees are singing now." But underneath it, almost like an echo, was another layer of sound. It was rhythmic, repetitive, and deeply unsettling. As the sound engineer had suggested, he isolated the audio, stripping away Sarah's voice. What remained was a series of low, guttural chanting. It was not English, it was not any known language Mark recognized. It was primal, ancient, and deeply resonant. Then, the engineer's final, horrifying instruction. "Now, try playing it in reverse playback." Mark's finger hovered over the reverse button. His heart pounded. He knew instinctively that he was about to cross a line he couldn't uncross. He pressed it. The chanting, previously guttural and indistinct, transformed. Played in reverse, the sounds suddenly coalesced, forming clear, albeit distorted, words. They were not words of comfort. They were not words of love. They were phrases, repeated over and over, in what sounded like a dead language. A language of ancient forests, of dark rituals, of things that predated humanity. Words of summoning, words of binding, words that seemed to praise something vast and consuming. Mark ripped the headphones off, Beale rising in his throat. The recording ended there, but the reverberations of those reversed whispers echoed in his mind. Sarah wasn't just talking about trees singing. She was channeling something ancient, something that spoke through her, something that was communicating with the world, and trying to bring her own daughter into its horrifying communion. The whispers weren't for Lily's comfort. They were a preparation, a dark lullaby for a child meant to be initiated into the terrifying secret of the woods. The baby monitor, meant to bring peace of mind, had instead captured the sound of his child's mother, or whatever was wearing her skin, speaking in tongues from the depths of a forgotten horror. Detective Harding, a grizzled veteran whose career had spanned decades of grisly cases, had seen it all. But the file on Sarah Langley, this was different. The official report from the county coroner's office was laconic, almost eerily so, for a case of such bizarre circumstances. Harding had requested all evidence be sent to a state-of-the-art forensic lab, and the results, stapled neatly within a crisp evidence bag, were nothing short stomach-churning. His pen scratched across his notepad, taking down the chilling findings. The first discovery, a colossal amount of forest debris. 14 pounds of forest debris in Sarah's stomach. An impossible amount for a human, even a desperate one, to have ingested. It wasn't just dirt. The analysis detailed a horrifying botanical cocktail. Finely ground bark, decomposed leaves, fungal spores, and disturbing quantities of fine hair-like root systems. Some of the roots were unlike any known flora in the Black Ridge Woods, displaying a strange, almost crystalline structure at a microscopic level. But the botanical was only the beginning. Mixed within the organic matter were fragments of bone, human bone, tiny, pulverized shards, clearly identifiable as phalanges, carpal bones, and even a sliver of what appeared to be a human tooth. The lab had even managed to reconstruct enough to identify a unique marker, a dental filling. Then came the truly grotesque artifact. Nested amidst the root fragments and bone dust, still partially coated in a viscous, dark fluid, was a wedding ring. It was tarnished, its inscription almost completely eroded, but enough remained to decipher a faint date. Oct 1987. Harding's blood ran cold. He knew that date. It belonged to Michael Vance, a hiker who had vanished without a trace in the Black Ridge Woods in 1987. His disappearance had been one of the county's coldest cases, a local legend. Vance's family had never recovered his body. Now, a part of him had reappeared inside Sarah Langley. The coroner's report, a masterpiece of clinical understatement, simply stated, "Subject appears to have digested several meals while missing, despite no food being consumed." The phrasing struck Harding as both precise and utterly terrifying. Digested, not merely swallowed. Her digestive system, by all accounts, had been actively processing this horrifying meal. Further examination of the stomach contents revealed something even more disturbing. The digestive acids within Sarah's stomach were far more potent than normal human gastric acid. They contained enzymes unknown to human biology, capable of breaking down dense organic matter, even bone, with alarming speed. It wasn't just what she had consumed, but how her body had processed it. Her internal chemistry had fundamentally changed. As Harding read through the grim details, a faint, unsettling sound seemed to emanate bag itself, which still contained a sealed sample of the stomach contents. A low, wet stomach gurgles unnaturally. Not the healthy rumble of digestion, but a sluggish, viscous churning, like thick mud being stirred. It was a sound that shouldn't be possible from an inert sample, a phantom echo of a grotesque internal process. The medical examiner, a man usually unshakable, had added a chilling personal note in the margins of his report. The primary digestive tracts showed an unusual elasticity and dark vascularization, almost as if They had been adapted. The subject's physiology, while outwardly human, exhibited internal mechanics consistent with a predatory creature designed to consume and process large, dense organic material. And the bone fragments, they showed signs of extreme acid erosion, not just physical breakdown. It was as if she had liquefied them. Harding pushed back from his desk, the fluorescent lights of the precinct station suddenly feeling too bright, too sterile. Sarah Langley hadn't merely survived. She had been fundamentally altered. The woods had transformed her into something else entirely. Whatever she had found at the real trail marker 14 hadn't just taken her. It had made her a consumer of the lost, an active part of the forest's dark ecosystem. The wedding ring from 1987 was not just evidence. It was a horrifying receipt. And the most terrifying thought of all, if Sarah's body could digest 14 pounds of forest and human remains without consuming food, then what, exactly, was she feeding on now that she was back? The implications made his blood run cold. The Black Ridge Woods had become a place of hushed warnings and chilling urban legends. Hikers were fewer, their steps more tentative, their eyes constantly scanning the tree line. Park rangers, usually stoic, now carried an unspoken tension. That's why Ranger Ben Carter, on his routine patrol last week, felt a prickle of dread when his distorted park ranger radio crackled to life, not with official comms, but with a frantic, broken transmission. This is Backpack, Unit 3. I'm at Dead Oak Creek. God, you won't believe. The voice was young, panicked, then dissolved into static. Ben immediately recognized the call sign of a young amateur backpacker named Kevin, who had stubbornly insisted on exploring the North Ridge Trail, despite the recent warnings. Ben tried to raise him, but only static replied. Then, a few minutes later, another transmission, clearer this time, but far more terrifying. It's Sarah Langley. I found her. She's here. She's alive. The hiker's voice was a mix of disbelief and triumph. But quickly, that triumph curdled into pure terror. Oh my God. Her mouth. It's wrong. It's moving. Wrong. Ben's blood ran cold. He knew the stories. He knew the unofficial whispers about the rescued hiker. He scrambled to his feet, abandoning his patrol route, and raced towards Dead Oak Creek. Meanwhile, Kevin's phone, tucked into a chest harness, was still recording. He'd been documenting his solo trek, a vlog for his small online following. The footage, later recovered, was the final devastating piece of the puzzle. It showed a dense thicket, bathed in the dappled sunlight of late afternoon. And then, standing perfectly still amongst the ancient oaks, was Sarah. She looked like Sarah. The same auburn hair, the same build, the familiar hiking gear. Kevin, despite his initial fear, had approached cautiously, his phone still rolling. Sarah? Is that you? Are you okay? The figure turned, and that's when the footage captured the impossible. It looks like Sarah, sounds like Sarah. Her head swiveled first, in that familiar, unnerving way, her body following moments later. She even offered a faint, strained wave. Kevin kept recording, trying to process the surreal encounter. He started to ask a question, something about what happened to her. And then, it began to smile. Not Sarah's old smile, not even the disturbing fixed rictus seen in the ER. This smile was new. It was a conscious, deliberate effort, a slow, horrifying stretching of her lips. Her mouth moved in an utterly unnatural fashion, the corners pulling back too far, revealing too much gum, too many teeth. It wasn't a natural, joyful expression. It was a painstaking, grotesque imitation, like something was learning to smile, practicing the mechanics of human emotion for the first time. The muscles around her jaw seemed to strain, to stretch beyond their biological limits, causing tiny, almost imperceptible tremors across her face. Her eyes remained dead, black pools utterly unaffected by the contortion of her mouth. Kevin, still recording, let out a choked sound, a strangled whimper of pure horror. He tried to back away, his footsteps crunching loudly on the leaves. The smile widened, then widened further, pulling the skin of her face taut, creating deep, unnatural creases. The sound of her jaw straining, the faint popping of cartilage, was almost audible even on the amateur recording. And then, with a wet, sickening jaw dislocates with a pop. Loud and clear, the entire lower jaw of the entity split open, dangling impossibly low, exposing a cavernous throat that seemed to pulse with a dark, viscous light. The smile became a gaping maw, wider than any human mouth could achieve, a black abyss of bone and raw tissue. From that impossible opening erupted a sound, a perfect human scream. It was piercing, raw, and filled with such pure, unadulterated terror that it stripped away all pretense of mimicking human emotion. It was the sound of a soul in unimaginable agony, a sound so utterly human in its despair that it shattered the illusion entirely. It wasn't Sarah's scream. It was a human scream. Perfect, agonizing, as if the entity had absorbed the very essence of human terror and was now broadcasting it, pure and unfiltered. The phone dropped. The screen went black. Only the chilling echo of that scream remained, fading into the rustling of the forest leaves. Ranger Ben Carter arrived minutes later, finding only the abandoned phone, still warm, lying on the forest floor. The scene was otherwise pristine. No trace of Kevin, no trace of Sarah. Only the memory of that horrifying, perfect scream reverberating through the silent, ancient woods. The woods had returned Sarah once. Now, they had taken another, and the final transmission made it clear. Whatever lived in Blackridge wasn't just wearing a disguise. It was refining its craft, and it was hungry for more. The authorities tried to contain it. They sealed off the North Ridge Trail, citing unforeseen environmental hazards, but the truth, pieced together from whispered anecdotes, leaked footage, and the sheer impossibility of the official explanations, spread like wildfire. The legend of Sarah Langley, the hiker who came back wrong, became a cautionary tale whispered around campfires, a chilling reminder of the unknown lurking in the wild. The ranger station, once a beacon of safety, now displayed a new, unofficial advisory. It wasn't a formal park notice, but a series of stark, hand-drawn posters, printed and taped discreetly in hidden corners, their ink bleeding slightly in the damp air. They were crude, desperate warnings, penned by someone who knew the truth, someone perhaps like Ranger Ben Carter, haunted by what he'd seen. The first line was bold, stark. If you hike near Blackridge Woods and see trail marker 14, turn back immediately. This wasn't a suggestion, it was an imperative. The true marker 14, Sarah's last known location, was no longer just a physical point on a map. It was a threshold, a doorway. The posters continued with specific, chilling prohibitions. Don't touch the trees, the bark, the leaves, the very roots. Mrs. Pearson's cornfield, Sarah's stomach contents, the low, unnatural hum. The forest wasn't just scenery. It was alive in a way no one understood, and it was capable of consumption, of transformation. Touching it meant inviting its insidious influence. Don't drink the water, Dead Oak Creek. The place of Sarah's reappearance, the site of Kevin's final recording, the place where life returned, twisted. Whatever permeated the earth there, whatever flowed through its veins, tainted everything it touched. It wasn't just hydration. It was ingestion, absorption, and then, the most terrifying instruction of all, printed in bolder, more desperate letters. And if you hear someone calling your name from behind you, the warning didn't end there. It continued, speaking directly to the primal fear that dwells in every human heart when alone in the wilderness. It tapped into the instinct to respond, to acknowledge, to turn and face the source of a familiar voice. But this voice, this was different. A chilling sound seemed to materialize in the air, a faint, almost subliminal presence that only the most attuned could perceive. It wasn't loud, not jarring. It was the soft, crisp twigs snap in perfect circle around listener, a series of distinct, dry crackles, not haphazard or random, but forming an invisible perimeter, moving with unnerving precision, encircling the very spot where you stood. The sound wasn't approaching you. It was already surrounding you. It implied you were already trapped, already a target. Unseen forces moving with deliberate, intelligent purpose, just out of sight. The final words of the warning were a desperate plea, a last-ditch effort to save a soul from a horror that transcended physical harm, a horror that stole essence, that mimicked identity. Never turn around, because what was behind you, what was calling your name, wasn't a lost friend. It was something that wore their voice, wore their shape, something that had learned to speak, to smile, to beckon. It was something that hunted not with speed or strength, but with mimicry and psychological terror. It wanted you to turn, to acknowledge it, to invite it into your reality. To turn was to engage, to be chosen, to become the next acquisition for its silent, unending feast. The Blackridge Woods had given up one of its victims, but it had taken something far more precious in return. The illusion of safety, the certainty of what was real, and it was still calling. The case was officially closed, marked missing persons, presumed deceased. The FBI eventually dismissed all anomalies as mass hysteria and misinterpretation. But for Mark, Sarah's husband, the horror was just beginning. He refused to believe it was over. He spent his days poring over every shred of evidence, every pixel of the distorted footage, every syllable of the chilling audio recordings. He became a ghost in his own home, consumed by a desperate, agonizing search for answers. Then, yesterday, the unthinkable happened. Mark disappeared. His last known location, near Dead Oak Creek, the same cursed place where Sarah was found, the same place where Kevin, the backpacker, had made his final, terrifying recording. Search teams, with a grim sense of déjà vu, scoured the familiar terrain. They found no body, no struggle, only his phone. It lay on the damp earth, its screen cracked, still recording. The recovered video was short, fragmented, but utterly conclusive. It began with Mark's frantic, heavy breathing. The camera was unstable, clearly held in a shaking hand, pointing vaguely ahead as he ran. He was calling out, "Sarah! Sarah, is that you?" His voice was hoarse, filled with a desperate hope. The phone's shaky lens swung wildly, capturing glimpses of ancient trees, gnarled roots, the familiar, unsettling atmosphere of the Blackridge Woods. Then, through a clearing in the mist, the camera centered, and there she was. It looked exactly like Sarah, standing still, facing away, just as she had been when first discovered. The same hair, the same mud-stained clothes. Mark slowed, his breathing catching. "Sarah? You're here. You're really here." His voice was thick with tears of relief and disbelief. The figure turned, slowly, gracefully. The head swiveled first, then the body followed, just as Medic Jenkins had described. And it smiled, that familiar, unnerving two-wide rictus that now haunted Mark's every waking moment. But this time, it was different. This smile was confident, practiced. It was no longer learning. It had mastered it. As Mark stumbled forward, his relief turning to a sickening cold dread, the thing raised its hand. Not in greeting, not in comfort. It was an invitation, a silent beckoning. And as it did, bathed in the dim, filtered light of the forest canopy, the horrifying truth became impossible to deny. The hand it raised was wrong, impossibly wrong. The fingers were too long, too slender, with an unnatural, glistening sheen to the skin. and as it lifted its hand, slowly, deliberately, the distinct, sickening sound of 12 fingers crack simultaneously filled the air, a series of rapid, dry clicks, echoing with an unnerving precision, as if each extra joint, each new segment of bone, was being flexed, accustomed to its new form. 12 distinct cracks, not the 10 of a human hand. The screen flickered, the image distorting, then went black. The recording ends. No scream. No struggle. Just the chilling finality of those 12 clicks. A sound that confirmed the impossible. Mark hadn't found Sarah. He had run towards the same entity that had taken her, that had replaced her, and had now perfected its mimicry. The woods had finally claimed him, not in a violent struggle, but in a horrific echo of his lost love. The entity that walked as Sarah, that had learned to smile, had now added another victim to its tally, a new set of data points for its horrifying evolution. And somewhere, deep within the Blackridge woods, the forest continued to consume, and the sounds of unnatural cracking joints waited for the next curious soul to answer its call.